What if I told you that one cruel comment about someone's weight could destroy a life, but also lead to the most powerful transformation you've ever witnessed? This millionaire thought he was superior to everyone around him, especially his loyal maid who had served him faithfully for years. But when he fired her for the most shallow reason imaginable, he had no idea he was about to learn a lesson that would bring him to his knees. The truth behind her condition was so heartbreaking, it would change everything he believed about success, worth, and what it truly means to be human. Stay with me because this story will shock you to your core. Welcome back to our channel where we share the most incredible true stories that will touch your heart and change your perspective on life. Today's story is about judgment, redemption, and the power of seeing beyond appearances. If you're ready for an emotional journey that will leave you speechless, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more life-changing stories like this one. Let's dive into this incredible tale that proves sometimes the people we judge the harshest are the ones who deserve our respect the most. Marcus Wellington stood in his marble-floored mansion, adjusting his Italian silk tie while gazing at his reflection in the gold-framed mirror. At 45, he had built an empire in real estate that made him one of the wealthiest men in the city. His success had fed his ego to dangerous proportions, making him believe that money determined a person's worth. He looked down on anyone who didn't meet his standards of perfection, treating his employees like they were beneath him. His cold, calculating eyes showed no warmth, no empathy, only the hardened stare of a man who had forgotten what it meant to be human. Every morning, Marcus would walk through his 20-room mansion like a king surveying his kingdom, finding fault with everything and everyone. He demanded perfection from his staff, but showed them no respect or appreciation for their hard work. The way he spoke to people revealed his true character, condescending, harsh, and completely void of compassion. He believed that because he paid their salaries, he owned them, and they should be grateful for any scraps of attention he threw their way. His wealth had become both his shield and his sword, protecting him from genuine human connection while he used it to cut down anyone who dared to be imperfect. The mansion itself was a testament to his obsession with image and status, filled with expensive artwork and furniture that impressed visitors but felt cold and lifeless. Everything had to be spotless, perfectly arranged, and maintained to his impossibly high standards. He would inspect every room with the intensity of a military general, pointing out the smallest flaws and making his staff feel like failures. His voice echoed through the halls with criticism and demands, never once offering a word of encouragement or gratitude. This was a man who had everything money could buy but had lost his soul in the process. Marcus had surrounded himself with people who either feared him or wanted something from him, never experiencing genuine friendship or love. His relationships were all transactional. He paid for services and expected unwavering loyalty and perfection in return. He had no family of his own, having driven away anyone who might have truly cared about him with his arrogance and cruelty. His loneliness was masked by his wealth, but deep down, he was emptier than the people he looked down upon. The irony was lost on him that the very people he treated as inferior possessed qualities he had long ago abandoned: kindness, humility, and genuine care for others. The staff whispered about him when they thought he couldn't hear, sharing stories of his latest outburst or unreasonable demand. They worked in fear, never knowing when he might explode over something trivial or decide that they were no longer worthy of employment in his perfect world. Despite his wealth and success, Marcus Wellington was about to learn that some lessons can only be taught through pain and humiliation. He was about to meet someone who would challenge everything he believed about worth, dignity, and what it truly means to be rich. But on this particular morning, as he straightened his tie and prepared to destroy someone's life over something as shallow as their appearance, he had no idea that his own world was about to come crashing down around him. Maria Santos had been working for Marcus Wellington for 3 years, arriving every morning at 6 sharp to begin her duties in the sprawling mansion. At 52 years old, her once slender frame now carried extra weight, the result of years of stress, exhaustion, and putting everyone else's needs before her own. She moved through the house with quiet efficiency, cleaning, cooking, and maintaining the pristine environment that Marcus demanded without ever complaining. Her gentle brown eyes held a sadness that spoke of countless hardships, yet they still sparkled with kindness whenever she encountered another human being. Despite the way Marcus treated her, she approached her work with dignity and pride, believing that honest labor was something to be respected. Every morning before dawn, Maria would kiss her sleeping family goodbye and make the long journey to the mansion, knowing she wouldn't see them again until late that evening. Her hands, rough from years of cleaning and scrubbing, worked tirelessly to maintain the spotless environment that Marcus demanded. She knew every corner of that house, every preference he had, and every way to anticipate his needs before he even voiced them. Her dedication went far beyond what her modest salary required. She genuinely cared about doing her job well, even for someone who showed her no appreciation. The other staff members looked up to her as a mother figure, always ready with a kind word or helping hand when they struggled. Maria's uniform was always clean and pressed, her graying hair pulled back neatly, and her manner consistently polite and respectful despite the daily humiliations she endured. She had learned to make herself invisible when Marcus was in one of his moods, quickly and quietly completing her tasks while avoiding his critical gaze. Her broken English mixed with her native Spanish when she was nervous, but she always tried her best to communicate clearly and professionally. She took pride in the gleaming surfaces, the perfectly arranged flowers, and the comfort of the home she helped maintain. In her mind, she wasn't just a maid. She was a caretaker, someone who helped create a beautiful space for others to enjoy. The weight she had gained over the years was a visible reminder of the stress and sacrifice that defined her life, but it never slowed her down or affected the quality of her work. She would often skip meals to save money for her family, grabbing only a piece of fruit or leftover bread to sustain her through long days of physical labor. Her body ached constantly from the demanding work, but she never complained or asked for special consideration. Other employees had come and gone, unable to tolerate Marcus's harsh treatment, but Maria endured because she had no choice. Her family depended on her income. She had weathered his storms of criticism and anger with the patience of a saint, always believing that if she just worked hard enough, he would eventually see her worth. Late at night, when she finally returned to her small apartment, Maria would collapse into a chair and wonder how much longer she could continue this exhausting routine. Her family needed her to be strong, to be the provider, to sacrifice her health and happiness for their survival. She would look in the mirror and see the toll that years of stress and overwork had taken on her body, but she had learned to find beauty in her purpose rather than her appearance. The extra weight she carried was evidence of a life lived in service to others, of meals skipped so her children could eat, of stress absorbed so her family could sleep peacefully. Tomorrow would bring another day of invisible service in a house where her humanity was forgotten, but she would face it with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through every challenge life had thrown her way. On this particular Tuesday morning, Marcus descended the marble staircase with his usual air of superiority, his expensive shoes clicking against the polished floor as he surveyed his domain. Maria was in the living room, carefully dusting the antique furniture with the same meticulous attention to detail she showed every day. The morning sunlight streaming through the crystal windows caught her profile as she worked, revealing the concentration and care she put into every task. She was humming softly to herself, a gentle melody that spoke of a spirit that hadn't been completely broken by years of harsh treatment. For a moment, she seemed almost peaceful, lost in her work and unaware of the storm that was about to hit her. Marcus paused at the bottom of the stairs, his cold eyes scanning the room for any imperfection he could criticize, when his gaze fell upon Maria's form. The cruel thought that entered his mind was like poison spreading through his consciousness, feeding off his arrogance and lack of empathy. He had been looking for a reason to assert his power, to remind everyone in his household of their place beneath him. The sight of Maria's weight, something he had noticed but never commented on before, suddenly became the target for his cruelty. His lips curled into a sneer as he prepared to deliver words that would cut deeper than any knife. "Maria!" His voice cut through the peaceful morning air like a whip, causing her to freeze mid-motion and turn toward him with startled eyes. The tone alone was enough to make her heart race with anxiety, as she had learned to recognize the signs of his incoming wrath. She set down her dusting cloth carefully and turned to face him, her hands clasped respectfully in front of her, waiting for whatever criticism or demand he was about to deliver. Her gentle face showed the strain of bracing herself for impact, like someone preparing for a physical blow. The morning light that had made her seem peaceful moments before now revealed the exhaustion and stress lines around her eyes. "Look at yourself," Marcus continued, his voice dripping with disgust and contempt. How do you expect to properly clean my home when you can barely move around without huffing and puffing like some kind of farm animal? The words hit Maria like physical blows, each one designed to cut deeper than the last, targeting her deepest insecurities and vulnerabilities. Her face flushed with shame and hurt, but she remained silent, knowing that any defense would only make his attack worse. The other staff members who could hear from adjacent rooms stopped what they were doing, horrified by the cruelty they were witnessing. Even for Marcus, this level of personal attack was shocking in its viciousness and complete lack of humanity. Your obesity is disgusting and unprofessional, he continued, each word carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage. I can't have someone who looks like you representing my household. What would my guests think if they saw you waddling around like this? Maria's eyes filled with tears that she fought desperately to hold back, her entire body trembling with the effort to maintain her composure in the face of such devastating cruelty. The man she had served faithfully for 3 years was reducing her entire worth as a human being to her physical appearance, dismissing years of dedicated service with words designed to destroy her spirit. She wanted to tell him about the sacrifices she had made, the reasons behind her weight gain, the love and dedication she brought to her work every single day. But she knew that in this moment, facing this level of cruelty, any word she spoke would fall on ears that had chosen to see her as less than human, and the worst part was knowing that something even more devastating was coming next. Marcus stood there savoring the look of devastation on Maria's face, his ego feeding off her pain like a predator enjoying the suffering of its prey. The power he felt in this moment was intoxicating to his corrupted soul, confirming his twisted belief that he was superior to those around him. He had crossed a line that no decent human being should ever cross, but in his arrogance, he saw it as his right to humiliate those in his employ. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, but the warmth couldn't penetrate the ice-cold cruelty that filled the room. Maria stood frozen, still hoping against hope that his attack was over, that he would return to his usual cold indifference and let her continue working. I've made my decision, Marcus announced with the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority and zero compassion. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Maria felt her world beginning to crumble around her even before he spoke his next words. Her hands began to shake as she realized that his cruelty wasn't finished, that something worse was coming. The other staff members who could hear held their breath, unable to believe that even Marcus would go this far. The grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick louder in the silence, marking the seconds before her life would be forever changed. You're fired, he declared with a satisfaction that was chilling in its completeness. I want you out of my house within the hour, and don't expect any references or recommendations from me. The words hit Maria like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and making her legs weak beneath her. 3 years of faithful service, of dedication and hard work, dismissed in an instant because of her appearance. She had survived his daily criticisms, his impossible standards, his complete lack of appreciation, but this was the end of everything. Her modest but vital income, gone. Her ability to support her family, destroyed. Her dignity, shattered by a man who had never shown her an ounce of human decency. But Mr. Wellington, Maria finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Please, I have worked so hard for you, I have never missed a day, never complained. Her plea was desperate but dignified, a final attempt to reach whatever humanity might still exist in the man before her. The other staff members wanted to speak up, to defend her, but they knew that doing so would only result in their own termination. Marcus's face showed no emotion except cold satisfaction as he watched her beg for the job that was her lifeline. He felt no remorse, no second thoughts, only the intoxicating rush of absolute power over another human being's fate. I don't want to hear excuses or sob stories, Marcus cut her off with brutal finality. Your appearance is an embarrassment to this household, and I won't tolerate it any longer. Now get out before I call security to remove you. The cruelty in his voice was absolute, leaving no room for negotiation or mercy, treating a human being like unwanted trash to be discarded. Maria's tears finally spilled over, running down her cheeks as the full reality of her situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. She had no savings to fall back on, no other job prospects, and a family depending on her income for their basic survival. As she turned to gather her few personal belongings, her whole body shaking with the enormity of what had just happened, She couldn't have known that this moment of devastating cruelty would eventually lead to a reckoning that would bring her tormentor to his knees. But for now, all she could feel was the crushing weight of injustice and the terrifying uncertainty of an impossible future. Maria walked slowly toward the small storage closet where she kept her personal belongings, each step feeling like she was walking through quicksand. Her legs trembled with the shock of what had just happened, and she had to steady herself against the wall to keep from collapsing. The other staff members watched her with hearts full of sympathy and rage, but none dared to speak or comfort her for fear of facing Marcus's wrath themselves. The sound of her quiet sobs echoed through the hallway, a heartbreaking melody of despair that would haunt the mansion long after she was gone. 20 minutes ago she had been humming contentedly while working. Now her entire world had been shattered by one man's inexcusable cruelty. Her hands shook violently as she gathered her few possessions. A small photo of her family, a worn sweater, and the lunch she had packed that morning but would now never eat. Each item felt impossibly heavy as she placed them in her old canvas bag, the weight of her shattered dreams making even simple movements feel overwhelming. She could hear Marcus in the next room, already on the phone arranging for a new cleaning service, discussing her replacement as if she were nothing more than a broken appliance to be disposed of. The casual indifference in his voice as he spoke about her termination was perhaps even more painful than his earlier cruelty. She had been reduced to nothing more than an inconvenience in his perfectly ordered world. As Maria prepared to leave the only stable job she had known for 3 years, the memories came flooding back, all the early mornings, the aching feet, the skipped meals, the overtime without extra pay. She had endured it all because she believed in the dignity of honest work and the importance of providing for her family. Now, as she walked through rooms she had cleaned thousands of times, she realized that none of her sacrifice and dedication had mattered to the man who had just destroyed her life. The beautiful home she had helped maintain with such care now felt like a prison of broken dreams and shattered hopes. Every surface she had polished, every floor she had scrubbed, every meal she had prepared, all of it had been invisible to someone who saw her as less than human. The walk to the front door felt like a death march, each step taking her further from financial security and closer to an uncertain and terrifying future. Her family was depending on her income for rent, food, medical bills, and her daughter's school expenses. How would she face them with the news that she had been fired for something as shallow as her appearance? The shame burned in her chest like acid, not shame for her body, but shame that she had failed to protect her family from this catastrophe. She thought about her daughter's face when she learned that her dreams of finishing school might have to be abandoned, about her elderly mother who needed medication that Maria could no longer afford to buy. The weight of their disappointed faces was heavier than any physical burden she had ever carried. As Maria reached the massive front door that she had polished countless times, she paused for one final look at the home that had defined her life for 3 years. Through her tears, she saw not the beautiful mansion that impressed visitors, but a cold monument to one man's heartless arrogance and complete lack of human decency. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and straightened her shoulders with whatever dignity she had left. The world outside looked impossibly vast and uncertain, full of challenges that seemed insurmountable without steady employment and income. But as she stepped through that door for the last time, clutching her meager belongings and her shattered dreams, Maria couldn't have imagined that her story was far from over, and that the same cruel twist of fate that had destroyed her world was about to set in motion a chain of events that would expose truths so powerful they would bring her tormentor to his knees in tears of regret and shame. What Marcus Wellington didn't know, what he had never bothered to learn in 3 years of Maria's faithful service, was the crushing weight of responsibility that rested on her shoulders every single day. As Maria walked away from the mansion that Tuesday morning, she carried with her secrets that would have brought any decent person to tears of admiration and respect. Her weight gain wasn't the result of laziness or lack of self-control, as Marcus had so cruelly assumed. It was the physical manifestation of a life spent in complete service to others, where her own health and well-being had become secondary to her family's survival. The stress hormones that flooded her body daily, the meals eaten standing up in the kitchen after 16-hour days, the sleepless nights worrying about bills and her family's future, all of it had taken its toll on a body that had been pushed beyond its limits for years. Maria was the sole provider for a household of 6 people, a responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders when her husband had been injured in a construction accident 5 years earlier. His disability check barely covered their basic medical expenses, leaving Maria to work multiple jobs just to keep their family housed and fed. In addition to her full-time position at Marcus's mansion, she cleaned offices 3 nights a week and took in laundry on weekends, often working 18-hour days without rest. Her body had responded to this chronic stress and exhaustion by storing every calorie it could, preparing for the famines that her irregular eating schedule suggested were coming. The weight that Marcus found so offensive was actually evidence of a body trying desperately to survive under impossible conditions. Her elderly mother lived with them, suffering from diabetes that required expensive medication and regular doctor visits that Maria somehow managed to afford on her meager income. Her youngest daughter showed exceptional promise in school but needed extra tutoring and supplies that stretched the family budget to its breaking point. Her teenage son worked part-time after school to help with expenses, but his earnings barely covered his own school supplies and transportation. Every dollar Maria earned was spoken for before she received it, leaving nothing for gym memberships, nutritious food, or the luxury of caring for her own physical needs. She had become a master of sacrifice, finding ways to feed her family while often going without meals herself, working through illness and injury because taking a day off meant her family wouldn't eat. The cruel irony was that Marcus's mansion was often the only place where Maria could find a moment of peace during her impossible schedule, the quiet morning hours when she could work alone with her thoughts before the day's chaos began. She had grown to love the orderly beauty of the house she maintained, finding satisfaction in creating a perfect environment even as her own living conditions remained chaotic and stressful. The early morning humming that had annoyed Marcus was actually Maria's way of finding joy in her work, of maintaining her sanity and spiritual strength in the face of overwhelming challenges. She had never complained about her workload or her circumstances because she had been raised to believe that honest work was noble, no matter how difficult or underappreciated. The extra weight she carried was also the result of a medical condition that she couldn't afford to properly treat, a thyroid issue that made losing weight nearly impossible even when she barely ate enough to sustain her energy levels. She had been to free clinics when possible, but consistent medical care was a luxury she couldn't afford when choosing between her medication and her daughter's school supplies. Her body had been running on stress hormones and determination for so long that it had forgotten how to function normally. The very qualities that Marcus found disgusting, her size, her fatigue, her occasional breathlessness, were actually badges of honor earned through years of selfless sacrifice for others. But as she walked away from his mansion that morning, her head held high despite her tears, Maria had no idea that the truth about her life was about to be revealed in a way that would shock Marcus to his very core and force him to confront the depth of his own cruelty and ignorance about the people he had deemed unworthy of basic human respect. At home, Maria had become a master of invisible sacrifice, making countless small choices every day that prioritized her family's needs over her own well-being. When dinner was prepared, she would serve everyone else first and then eat whatever remained, often claiming she wasn't hungry when there wasn't enough food to go around. Her children never knew that their mother regularly skipped meals so they could have seconds, or that she diluted her portions with extra vegetables and rice to make the protein stretch further. Her own plate was always the last filled and the first emptied when someone needed more. The extra weight she carried was partially the result of her body's desperate attempt to store energy from these irregular eating patterns, clinging to every calorie because it never knew when the next meal would come. Her youngest daughter, Isabella, was 15 and had dreams of becoming a teacher, but she needed extra tutoring in mathematics to qualify for the scholarship program that would make college possible. Maria worked extra hours whenever possible to pay for these sessions, often arriving home after midnight from her second job at the office building downtown. She would find Isabella asleep at the kitchen table, homework spread around her, and would gently carry her to bed before starting her own household chores. The sight of her daughter's determined face, even in sleep, gave Maria the strength to continue when her body screamed for rest. She had promised Isabella that education would be their family's way out of poverty, and she would sacrifice anything to keep that promise alive. Her 17-year-old son, Miguel, had inherited his father's mechanical aptitude and worked part-time at a neighborhood garage after school to help with family expenses. Maria felt guilty that he couldn't participate in sports or social activities like other teenagers, but Miguel never complained about his responsibilities. She would leave encouraging notes in his lunchbox and always made sure his school clothes were perfectly clean and pressed, maintaining his dignity even when they couldn't afford new ones. When Miguel's boss praised his work ethic and offered him more hours, Maria felt a bittersweet pride. happy for his success but heartbroken that he was growing up too fast, carrying burdens that should have been hers alone. The medical expenses for her family seemed endless and impossible. Her husband's pain medication, her mother's diabetes supplies, her own untreated thyroid condition that made every day a struggle with fatigue and weight gain. Maria had become an expert at stretching every dollar, finding free clinics, negotiating payment plans, and sometimes making the heartbreaking choice between medication and groceries. She would lie awake at night calculating and recalculating their budget, trying to find ways to make their limited income cover their unlimited needs. Her stress-induced insomnia had become chronic, adding to her health problems but giving her extra hours to take in laundry or mending work that brought in a few additional dollars. Every evening when Maria finally sat down, usually after 11 p.m. when everyone else was asleep, she would look around at her small but clean apartment and feel a complex mixture of pride and exhaustion. Her children were fed, clean, and safe. Her mother's medication was up to date. The rent was paid for another month. These victories came at the cost of her own health, her social life, her dreams, and her physical well-being, but she had never questioned whether the sacrifice was worth it. She was a mother, and mothers do whatever is necessary to protect their children's futures, even if it means destroying their own present. But now, sitting in that same chair with a termination notice in her hand, and no idea how she would replace her primary income, Maria realized that all her sacrifices might not have been enough to save her family from the disaster that Marcus Wellington had just created with his cruel words and heartless decision. The weight of her failure pressed down on her like a physical force, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to wonder if love and determination would be enough to overcome the obstacles ahead. As the afternoon sun filtered through the expensive silk curtains of his empty mansion, Marcus Wellington sat in his leather chair surrounded by all the trappings of success, yet feeling more hollow than he had ever admitted to himself. The silence that had once felt like peaceful luxury now seemed oppressive, broken only by the distant sound of his remaining staff going about their duties with the fearful efficiency he demanded. His morning's cruelty toward Maria had given him a brief rush of power, but as the hours passed, that feeling had faded into something resembling emptiness. He poured himself an expensive whiskey, the third of the afternoon, and gazed out at his perfectly manicured grounds where no genuine laughter had echoed in years. The massive dining room table that could seat 20 people had been set for one, as it was every evening, with the finest china and crystal that had never been used for a celebration or shared meal with people he cared about. Marcus ate his gourmet meals in solitude, served by staff who feared him too much to engage in conversation, reading business reports that only reinforced his isolation from the human experience. His wealth had bought him everything except the one thing he didn't even realize he was missing: genuine connection with another human being. Every relationship in his life was transactional, based on fear, money, or both, leaving him surrounded by people but fundamentally alone in the world. His phone rang frequently with business associates seeking deals, social climbers hoping for invitations to his exclusive parties, and staff members reporting on household matters, but never once did it ring with someone calling simply because they cared about his well-being. Marcus had trained himself to see this independence as strength. But in quiet moments like these, when the business of the day was finished and the house settled into evening stillness, he felt the weight of his emotional poverty. He had lovers who came and went, attracted to his wealth and status, but none who knew or cared about the man beneath the expensive suits and cruel exterior. His bed was large and luxurious, but he slept alone, waking up each morning to face another day of meaningless achievements and hollow victories. The walls of his study were lined with awards, photographs of him with celebrities and politicians, and expensive artwork that impressed visitors but held no personal meaning for him. He had no family photos because he had pushed away everyone who had ever tried to love him, choosing his pride and control over the messy, complicated, but ultimately rewarding experience of genuine relationships. His parents had died years ago, disappointed in the cold, calculating man their son had become. His few relatives had stopped reaching out after too many rejected invitations and cruel rejections. He had systematically eliminated anyone from his life who might have challenged his worldview or demanded that he show basic human decency. As evening approached and Marcus prepared for another solitary dinner, he caught his reflection in the antique mirror that dominated his dining room wall and saw something that momentarily disturbed him. Behind the expensive grooming and perfectly tailored clothing was the face of a man who had forgotten how to smile genuinely, whose eyes held no warmth or joy, whose expression had hardened into a permanent mask of superiority and disdain. For just a moment, he wondered what it would be like to have someone care whether he came home at night, to have a reason to smile that wasn't related to money or power, to feel the warmth of gratitude instead of the cold satisfaction of control. But as quickly as these thoughts came, he pushed them away, telling himself that such weakness was for lesser people, people like the maid he had fired that morning for failing to meet his impossible standards. He had no idea that his cruelest act yet had set in motion a chain of events that would soon strip away all his defenses and force him to confront the devastating price he had paid for his wealth and the terrible emptiness that lay at the heart of his seemingly perfect life. 3 weeks after firing Maria, Marcus found himself driving through a part of the city he rarely visited, having gotten lost after a business meeting in an unfamiliar neighborhood. His expensive car felt conspicuous among the modest homes and small businesses that lined the streets, reminding him of how far removed his life was from the reality most people faced daily. He was irritated by the delay, eager to return to the comfort of his familiar environment where everything was predictable and controlled. As he stopped at a red light, he drummed his fingers impatiently on the steering wheel, glancing around at the bustling sidewalks with the casual indifference of someone who had never had to worry about the struggles of ordinary people. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the street, and he was about to turn his attention back to his phone when something caught his eye that made his blood run cold. There, across the street at a bus stop, sat a familiar figure that he recognized despite the changes that 3 weeks of unemployment had wrought. Maria was sitting on a worn wooden bench, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, holding what appeared to be a stack of job applications that had been rejected. Her clothes, while clean, showed the wear of someone stretching a limited wardrobe, and her face bore the drawn look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. Next to her sat a young girl in a school uniform, her books and supplies carefully organized in a worn backpack, both of them waiting for public transportation that would take them to whatever destination offered hope in their increasingly desperate situation. The sight of his former employee in such reduced circumstances should have satisfied his ego, but instead, it stirred something uncomfortable in his chest that he couldn't immediately identify. As Marcus watched, frozen in his luxury car while traffic moved around him, he observed an interaction that would change his entire understanding of the woman he had so cruelly dismissed. An elderly homeless man approached Maria and her daughter, clearly asking for help, and without hesitation, Maria reached into her purse and pulled out what appeared to be her last few dollars, handing them to the stranger with a gentle smile and a few kind words in Spanish. The man's face lit up with gratitude, and he blessed Maria repeatedly before shuffling away to buy what was probably his first meal in days. Marcus realized with a shock that this woman, who had been unemployed for 3 weeks and was clearly struggling financially, had just given away money she desperately needed to help someone who was even worse off than she was. The young girl with Maria, who Marcus now realized must be her daughter, watched this interaction with obvious pride, as if such acts of generosity were commonplace in their family despite their limited resources. She leaned against her mother's shoulder, and Maria wrapped her arm around the girl protectively, both of them sharing a moment of quiet contentment even while waiting for a bus in circumstances that would have sent Marcus into a rage of indignation. The contrast between their obvious financial struggles and their evident love for each other created a picture that challenged everything Marcus had believed about success, happiness, and human worth. He found himself studying Maria's face, searching for signs of bitterness or anger about her situation, but saw instead a quiet dignity that spoke of inner strength he had never recognized. A car honked behind him, breaking Marcus out of his trance and forcing him to drive forward, but he couldn't stop glancing in his rearview mirror at the woman whose life he had so casually destroyed. As his expensive car carried him back toward his empty mansion, he found himself thinking about the scene he had just witnessed with growing unease. The image of Maria giving away her last dollars to help a stranger, while her own daughter sat beside her in worn shoes and a too small uniform, had shaken something loose in his carefully constructed worldview. For the first time since firing her, Marcus began to wonder if there might be more to Maria's story than he had ever bothered to learn, and the uncomfortable realization that he might have made a terrible mistake was beginning to take root in his conscience, growing stronger with each mile that carried him away from a truth he was only beginning to understand. That evening, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on his usual business reports, his mind haunted by the image of Maria's gentle generosity toward the homeless man despite her own obvious need. Something about the scene had disturbed his carefully maintained sense of superiority, forcing him to confront questions he had never allowed himself to ask before. Unable to shake his unease, he made a decision that surprised even him. He called Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who lived next to Maria's apartment building, someone who had occasionally provided references for his domestic staff. What started as a casual inquiry about Maria's character quickly became a devastating education about the woman whose life he had so carelessly destroyed. Maria Santos. Mrs. Henderson's voice warmed immediately. "Oh, Mr. Wellington, she's one of the finest people I've ever known. Why do you ask? I heard she lost her job recently, and I've been worried sick about that family." Marcus felt his first stab of genuine discomfort, as he realized his reputation for cruelty had preceded him even to this kind stranger. As Mrs. Henderson began to tell Maria's story, each detail hit Marcus like a physical blow, painting a picture of sacrifice and nobility that was the complete opposite of everything he had assumed about his former employee. He learned about Maria's husband's disability, about her multiple jobs, about the medical expenses that consumed every dollar she earned, and about the thyroid condition that made her weight gain unavoidable despite her best efforts. "That woman works harder than anyone I've ever seen," Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice filled with admiration and concern. "She leaves for your house at 5 in the morning and doesn't get home until after midnight most days, stopping at 2 other cleaning jobs on the way. I've watched her carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs when the elevator was broken, her arms full of food for her family while she looked like she was about to collapse from exhaustion herself. Her children adore her, and she'd give them the shirt off her back if they needed it. She's been supporting 6 people on those 3 jobs, and I don't know how she's managed it for so long without breaking down completely." Each word from Mrs. Henderson felt like a knife twisting in Marcus's chest as he realized the magnitude of his ignorance and cruelty. He learned that Maria had been skipping meals to pay for her daughter's tutoring, that she had been taking on extra laundry work to afford her mother's medication, that every pound she had gained was the result of stress, medical issues, and a schedule that allowed no time for self-care. The woman he had mocked for her appearance had been slowly destroying her own health to ensure her family's survival, working 18-hour days while battling a medical condition that made weight loss nearly impossible. The breathlessness he had cruelly compared to a farm animal was actually the result of chronic exhaustion and untreated health issues that she couldn't afford to address. "The saddest part," Mrs. Henderson continued, unaware of the devastation her words were causing, "is that she never complains, never asks for help, never lets on how hard things are for her family. She just keeps working and hoping and praying that things will get better. Her children don't even know how much she sacrifices for them. She protects them from worry by carrying all the burden herself. When I see her in the evenings, dragging herself up those stairs after another impossible day, I wonder how much longer she can keep going. That job she lost was their lifeline, and I honestly don't know how they're going to survive without it." As Marcus hung up the phone, his hands were trembling with the weight of what he had just learned, and for the first time in years, he felt something that might have been shame burning in his chest. The woman he had fired for being disgusting and unprofessional was actually a hero of the highest order, someone who had sacrificed everything for her family's welfare while maintaining a dignity and kindness that put his own character to shame. He realized that in 3 years of employing her, he had never once asked about her life, her challenges, or her needs. He had simply taken her excellent work for granted while judging her based on superficial appearances that told none of her real story. As he sat in his empty mansion surrounded by meaningless luxury, Marcus began to understand that he had just destroyed the life of someone infinitely more worthy of respect than he had ever been, and the weight of that realization was about to crush everything he thought he knew about success, worth, and what it truly meant to be human. The next morning, Marcus woke up in his king-sized bed feeling like he had been hit by a truck, the weight of Mrs. Henderson's revelations pressing down on him like a physical force. For the first time in years, he couldn't bring himself to look at his reflection in the mirror, afraid of what he might see in his own eyes. The expensive Egyptian cotton sheets that usually felt luxurious now seemed suffocating, and the silence of his mansion, once a source of peaceful control, now felt like the hollow echo of a life lived without purpose or meaning. Every detail of his conversation with Mrs. Henderson played on repeat in his mind, each revelation about Maria's sacrifices hitting him with fresh waves of guilt and self-loathing that he had never experienced before. As he moved through his morning routine, everything around him seemed tainted by his newfound awareness of his own cruelty. The marble floors that Maria had scrubbed on her hands and knees while supporting 6 people on her modest salary. The crystal chandelier she had carefully cleaned while skipping meals to pay for her daughter's education. The expensive furniture she had polished while working 3 jobs to afford her family's medical expenses. Every surface in his home had been touched by the hands of a woman who embodied everything noble about human nature, while he had embodied everything cruel and shallow. The irony was devastating. The person he had deemed unworthy had been working in the presence of someone truly unworthy, and she had done it with grace and dignity that he was only now beginning to understand. His breakfast, prepared by the expensive catering service he had hired to replace Maria, tasted like sawdust in his mouth as he thought about her giving away her last few dollars to help a homeless stranger. The contrast between her instinctive generosity and his calculated cruelty was so stark that it made him physically ill. He tried to focus on his business reports, the stock portfolios, the real estate deals that had always given his life meaning, but they all seemed trivial and meaningless in the face of what he had learned about real character and genuine worth. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus was forced to confront the possibility that everything he had built his identity around, wealth, power, control, was actually evidence of his moral bankruptcy rather than his success. The guilt that consumed him was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a deep, gnawing pain that seemed to affect every cell in his body. He found himself remembering every cruel word he had spoken to Maria, every time he had dismissed her humanity, every moment when he could have shown basic decency but had chosen cruelty instead. The image of her face when he fired her, the shock, the pain, the desperate plea for understanding, was burned into his memory like a brand. He realized that in that moment, he hadn't just fired an employee. He had potentially destroyed a family, ended a daughter's educational dreams, threatened an elderly woman's access to life-saving medication, and crushed the spirit of someone who had never done anything but serve him faithfully. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself unable to function normally, canceling meetings and avoiding phone calls as he struggled to process the magnitude of his mistake. He wandered through his empty mansion like a ghost, seeing it clearly for the first time as a monument to his own selfishness and isolation. The wealth that had once felt like armor now felt like a prison, separating him from the real world where people like Maria lived lives of genuine meaning and sacrifice. He thought about her daughter, probably wearing the same worn shoes to school, unaware that her mother's termination had been based on nothing more than one man's shallow prejudice and inexcusable cruelty. The weight of responsibility for their suffering was becoming unbearable, and for the first time in his life, Marcus Wellington was beginning to understand what it felt like to be truly ashamed of the person he had become, knowing that the road to redemption would require him to confront not just Maria, but the decades of heartless behavior that had led him to this moment of devastating moral reckoning. 3 days later, Marcus stood outside Maria's modest apartment building, his expensive car looking absurdly out of place among the working-class neighborhood's practical vehicles and well-worn sidewalks. He had spent those 3 days wrestling with his conscience, trying to find the courage to face the woman whose life he had so carelessly destroyed, and the words to express remorse for actions that seemed unforgivable even to himself. His hands shook as he climbed the 3 flights of stairs that Mrs. Henderson had mentioned Maria climbed daily while carrying groceries for her family, each step making him more aware of the physical challenges she faced that he had never bothered to consider. The hallway was clean but worn, speaking of a community that took pride in their homes despite limited resources, and Marcus felt his privilege weighing on him like a millstone around his neck. When Maria opened the door and saw him standing there, the shock and fear in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees with shame. She was wearing a simple house dress, her hair pulled back in the same neat style she had maintained at work, but her face showed the strain of weeks without income and the constant worry about her family's future. Behind her, he could see her daughter doing homework at a small kitchen table, the apartment clean and organized despite its obvious limitations, filled with the warmth and love that his mansion had always lacked. The contrast between this humble home and his empty palace was so stark that it made him question everything he had ever believed about success and happiness. "Mr. Wellington," Maria said quietly, her voice steady but guarded. "What are you doing here?" The dignity in her tone, even after everything he had put her through, was like salt in the wound of his guilt. Marcus struggled to find words that could possibly express the depth of his remorse and shame, realizing that no apology could undo the damage he had caused or restore the weeks of income and security he had stolen from her family. His throat felt tight with emotions he hadn't experienced in decades, and for a moment he could only stand there, a powerful millionaire rendered speechless by the moral superiority of a woman he had treated as less than human. "Maria, he began, his voice cracking with the weight of what he needed to say. "I came to apologize, and to try to make things right, though I know that nothing I say can excuse what I did to you." The words felt inadequate and hollow, but they were the first honest things he had said to her in 3 years of employment. He saw her eyes widen slightly at his tone. Gone was the arrogant superiority, replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "I've learned things about your life, about your family, about who you really are, and I realize that I am the one who should be ashamed, not you. I fired you based on ignorance and cruelty, and I've spent every day since then wishing I could take it back. I know about your husband, about your other jobs, about your medical condition, about the sacrifices you make for your family," Marcus continued, the words tumbling out as if a dam had burst inside him. "I know that everything I said to you was not only cruel but completely wrong, and I know that you are a better person than I will ever be." Maria's eyes filled with tears, not of hurt this time, but of something that looked like relief at finally being seen and understood for who she really was. The hallway seemed to shrink around them as this moment of truth unfolded, two people from completely different worlds brought together by the devastating consequences of judgment and the fragile possibility of redemption. But as Marcus prepared to offer her everything he could to try to repair the damage he had done, he had no idea that what was about to happen next would complete his transformation from heartless millionaire to broken human being, finally understanding the true meaning of wealth, poverty, and the immeasurable value of human dignity and forgiveness. As Marcus stood in that humble hallway, watching Maria's tears of recognition and relief, something fundamental shifted inside him that went far deeper than simple remorse or guilt. For the first time in his adult life, he was seeing another human being not as an object to be used or discarded, but as a complete person with dreams, struggles, and an inner strength that dwarfed anything he had ever achieved in business. The woman before him represented everything he had lost in his pursuit of wealth and power: compassion, sacrifice, genuine love for others, and the ability to find meaning in service rather than dominance. Her quiet dignity in the face of his cruelty had revealed not her weakness, but his own moral poverty, and the realization was transforming him from the inside out. "Please," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "let me give you back your job, let me pay you for the weeks you've lost, let me help with your family's medical expenses and your daughter's education." The words came from a place he didn't even know existed inside him, a desire to serve rather than be served, to use his resources to heal rather than to control. But even as he made these offers, he understood that they were really for his own salvation as much as her relief. He needed to prove to himself that he could be something other than the cruel, empty person he had become. Maria looked at him with eyes that held no hatred or bitterness, only a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare might have an end that didn't destroy her family's future. "Mr. Wellington," Maria said softly, "I accept your apology, and I forgive you, but I need to know that this change in you is real, not just guilt that will fade when you feel better about yourself." Her words cut through his soul with surgical precision, forcing him to confront the difference between temporary remorse and permanent transformation. She had seen through to the heart of his motivation with the same clarity that had allowed her to maintain her dignity through years of his thoughtless cruelty. The forgiveness she offered was genuine, but it came with a challenge that terrified him. The challenge to become worthy of it, not just in this moment of crisis, but in every moment that followed. Marcus felt tears running down his face for the first time in decades, not tears of self-pity but tears of genuine remorse for the pain he had caused and the years he had wasted living as someone unworthy of respect or love. Looking at Maria, he saw not just his former employee, but a teacher who had unknowingly been trying to show him what real strength looked like all along. Her quiet endurance, her selfless love for her family, her ability to maintain kindness in the face of cruelty, these were the qualities that defined true success, and he had been too blind to see them. The realization that he had spent years in the presence of someone extraordinary, while treating her as ordinary, was perhaps the most painful part of his awakening. "I don't know how to be the person you deserve to work for," Marcus admitted, the words feeling like a confession that exposed decades of spiritual emptiness, "but I want to learn, and I want to start by making sure that your family never has to suffer because of my ignorance again." As he spoke these words, Marcus felt something breaking open inside his chest, all the walls he had built around his heart crumbling in the face of Maria's extraordinary grace and forgiveness. The millionaire who had thought himself superior to everyone around him was discovering that he had been living in spiritual poverty while surrounded by people of genuine wealth, the wealth of character, compassion, and courage. But as he prepared to begin the long journey of becoming worthy of Maria's forgiveness and his own redemption, he couldn't have imagined that the most powerful moment of transformation was still to come, a moment that would strip away the last of his defenses and leave him completely broken open to the truth about what it means to be truly rich in the things that matter most. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same mansion that had once been his prison of privilege, but everything about it had changed in ways that reflected the complete transformation of the man who lived there. Maria had returned to work, but not as his employee, as his partner in creating something meaningful with his wealth. Together, they had converted part of his home into a community center where Maria's neighbors could receive job training, medical assistance, and educational support for their children. The cold, perfect rooms that had once showcased his arrogance now buzzed with the warmth of families learning new skills, children doing homework with volunteer tutors, and elderly people receiving free health screenings. The mansion had become a place where real wealth, the wealth of human connection and service, was created and shared every day. Marcus had discovered that the emptiness he had carried for so long wasn't caused by lack of money or power, but by lack of purpose beyond himself. Working alongside Maria to serve their community had taught him what his millions could never buy: the deep satisfaction that comes from using your gifts to lift others up rather than to set yourself apart. He had learned Spanish so he could communicate better with the families they served, had studied nutrition and health to help people facing the same challenges that had affected Maria's weight, and had opened his contacts and resources to create job opportunities for people who had been written off by others. The man who had once fired someone for their appearance now spent his days celebrating the potential he saw in everyone who walked through his doors. On this particular evening, as the community center activities were winding down and families were heading home with groceries from the food pantry Marcus had established, he found himself standing in the kitchen with Maria, preparing meals for delivery to elderly shut-ins in the neighborhood. The easy companionship between them was something he had never experienced in any of his previous relationships, built not on what he could take, but on what they could give together. Maria had become his teacher, his partner in service, and the closest friend he had ever had. She had shown him that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts but in the lives you touched, the burdens you helped carry, and the hope you could kindle in the hearts of people who had been forgotten by the world. "Do you remember the day you fired me?" Maria asked gently as they packed the last of the meals, her voice holding no bitterness, only the quiet wisdom that had always been there but that Marcus had been too blind to see. The question stopped him in his tracks, not because it brought back shame, though it still did, but because it marked the distance he had traveled from that cruel, empty person to the man he was becoming. "I remember," he replied, his voice thick with emotion, "and I remember thinking I was better than you because I had money and you didn't. I had no idea that you were the richest person I had ever met, and that I was the poorest." The truth of those words settled between them like a benediction, acknowledging the magnitude of the transformation that had taken place in both their lives. As they delivered the meals together, Marcus reflected on how completely his understanding of success had changed. The business deals that had once thrilled him now seemed insignificant compared to the smile on an elderly man's face when he received a warm meal, or the pride in a teenager's eyes when she earned her GED through their education program. The mansion that had once been a monument to his isolation was now filled with laughter, learning, and the kind of genuine wealth that can never be stolen or lost. Maria had not only forgiven his cruelty but had shown him how to forgive himself by becoming someone worthy of that forgiveness. Looking at her now, this woman whose strength and grace had shattered his world and rebuilt it into something beautiful, Marcus felt the tears come again, not tears of shame this time, but tears of gratitude for the day when his cruelest act had led him to discover his humanity, and for the extraordinary woman who had taught him that the richest life is one spent in service to others, and that true wealth can only be measured by the love we give and the lives we touch along the way. This incredible story of transformation reminds us that our worst moments can sometimes lead to our greatest growth, but only if we have the courage to face the truth about ourselves and change. Marcus thought he was superior because of his money, but Maria was truly wealthy in all the ways that matter: compassion, sacrifice, dignity, and love for others. What struck you most about this story? Was it Maria's incredible strength in the face of cruelty, or Marcus's complete transformation from heartless millionaire to someone who finally understood what real wealth looks like? Leave me a comment below and tell me which moment in this story hit you the hardest. I love hearing your thoughts on these powerful stories of redemption and change. If this story touched your heart and made you think differently about success, judgment, and what it truly means to be rich, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will inspire you and change your perspective on life. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos, and check out the video above this one for another amazing story of transformation that will leave you speechless. Thank you for watching, and remember, true wealth isn't what you have, it's what you give and the lives you touch along the way.